The name echoed in his mind, familiar yet painful. Ghislaine couldn't forget the weight it once carried through countless battles. Memories surfaced, shattered reflections of blood-soaked days, broken alliances, old regrets, and a name whispered in every corner of the world. Once Ghislaine stood tall, a name sung by bards and feared by kings, yet now his legacy seemed fragmented, incomplete. Fate hadn't been kind to him. Betrayals and despair had chipped away at his honor, leaving scars no weapon could heal. Ghislaine Perdium, once proclaimed as the continent's greatest warrior, now sat on a throne of faded glory, his presence no longer uncontested. The battlefield burned, an inferno swallowing everything. Ghislaine approached slowly, dragging his weapon, his silhouette sharp against the fire's roar. His enemies scrambled in fear, their leader gasping for breath. Ghislaine's stride never faltered, calm, deliberate, like a predator reclaiming its hunt. The blazing flames painted his black armor with a hellish glow. The ground trembled as his presence commanded every soul's attention. The battered enemy recognized him, fear etched on their broken face. Ghislaine didn't blink. He had returned to settle unfinished debts. For Ghislaine, victory wasn't just reclaiming his name. It was showing them that legends like him never truly disappeared into ashes. The enemy's numbers no longer surprised him. Ghislaine had known about their reinforcements long before their boots even touched the soil. Every spy, every hidden alliance, it was no secret to Ghislaine. Their plans unraveled like puppets whose strings were already severed. The truth had always been there, layered like the nesting dolls of treachery. Ghislaine's foresight made him an unstoppable force. Ghislaine's piercing gaze held no mercy. He stood unshaken, his every move proof that this battle was already decided. The leader's disbelief turned to horror. Ghislaine had been their hidden ace all along, a relentless king who played the long game. Blood streamed down his face as he roared in disbelief, his pride shattered. How could someone so insignificant ruin everything I built? Rage consumed him. His words were venomous as he seethed. Ghislaine, standing tall, exuded the calm authority of an executioner. Ghislaine moved with chilling precision, a blade of shadow cutting through the chaos. The flames made his armor glow like molten steel. A helmet rolled across the scorched ground. Ghislaine watched it impassively, as if every step had been calculated long before the fight. He lifted his gaze, eyes sharp as steel. I planned for this, every path, every failure. It all leads to me winning. The cold air lingered, thick with dread. A year ago, none could have guessed this battlefield would birth the legend's return. Ghislaine gasped awake in a dim tent, the nightmares of his defeat burning as vividly as the pain in his chest. I'm alive! The words escaped him in disbelief. He stared at his trembling hands, unsure if this was a curse or blessing. Outside, swords clashed and voices cried in fury. The sound jolted him awake, forcing him to reclaim his strength from the ruins. Ghislaine rose, his resolve sharpened like the blade he once wielded. This time, history would not end in betrayal and defeat. Blood splattered across the ground as Ghislaine staggered back. The weight of his failure struck like a blade through his armor's cracks. Pain rippled through him. His foe's strike landed deep, stealing his breath and strength. For a moment, his vision blurred with finality. His legs faltered, his body crumbling to the ground. Ghislaine thought of his name, now stained. Was this how a legend dies? Idun, fierce and resolute, stood above him. The war is over, she declared. The battlefield stilled, a graveyard of fallen hopes and dreams. Any last words? She asked calmly. Ghislaine smiled faintly, whispering, none. His story would not end here. Revenge had simply found a new beginning. Blood streaked across Ghislaine's face as his fury peaked. His enemies could no longer mock him, not when his vengeance had begun. Idun smiled faintly, her calm demeanor a sharp contrast to his rage. I didn't expect you to last this long, Ghislaine. The blade struck deep, drawing even more blood. For a moment, Ghislaine fell silent, his vision blurring from exhaustion and pain. He looked up through bloodshot eyes. How do you know all this? His voice cracked, disbelief clouding his determination to fight. Idun gestured toward the battlefield, her voice unwavering. Because I've been tracking you for far longer than you realize, Ghislaine. Idun's words were like knives stabbing into Ghislaine's resolve. Your family's fall wasn't an accident. We worked together to destroy them. Ghislaine's pupils narrowed. Rage erupted inside him. We? The word echoed like thunder, his mind unraveling in disbelief and betrayal. Shadows loomed in the red haze. Idun continued, coldly explaining how others conspired against his household, leaving him powerless to stop them. Blood boiled within Ghislaine, his teeth gritting. Every muscle in his body trembled with anger. Idun's calmness only fueled the inferno inside him. You bastard! Ghislaine roared, eyes blazing with hatred. I will never forgive you! His scream cut through the battlefield like a war cry. Ghislaine's vision swam as Aiden's blade descended. The fiery battlefield felt distant, like a nightmare he couldn't escape. It was too late. The world turned red. He felt the cut, searing pain that shattered his body. He watched his blood spill across the scorched earth. Yet he blinked, the vision faded, and he was alive. Ghislaine stared at his reflection, confused. How am I here? Was it real? He touched his face, his heart racing. The man he saw in the mirror was himself, but younger. A second chance awaited. I am my younger self, Ghislaine realized, fists clenching. The realization struck like lightning. Revenge was his once more, but this time he would not fail. Ricardo burst into the tent, breathless and panicked. Young master, he shouted, the desperation in his voice startling the silent room. Ghislaine's gaze snapped toward him, confused. Ricardo's trembling hands revealed his urgency, but his words remained cryptic and oddly controlled. Perdium soldier Ricardo, the name echoed faintly in Ghislaine's mind. A loyal face from the past, yet everything now felt out of place. Ricardo's calm expression shifted as he held the sword closer. Answer my questions and I might let you live. Or maybe not. Ghislaine's eyes widened slightly. The faint glow of malice in Ricardo's gaze hinted that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Ricardo hesitated, his voice shaking. Young master? Ghislaine's calm face now unsettled him as the tension between them thickened. Ghislaine's blade pressed closer, but Ricardo muttered nervously, Don't you think this is going too far? I'm loyal to you, aren't I? A deep frown crossed Ghislaine's face. What are you talking about? Ricardo blinked, disbelief washing over his face as confusion grew. You passed out, Ricardo yelled, frustration flaring. You went on about orcs and throwing a tantrum, then fell asleep. Ghislaine stared at him, his mind racing. The events Ricardo described sounded absurd. Tantrums? None of it aligned with his resolve or memories. The orcs? Ghislaine echoed, his voice laced with disbelief. His sharp mind struggled to connect the fragments of this newfound chaos. Ricardo scowled. You threw a tantrum over the mission. What's with you today? His words only deepened Ghislaine's growing confusion. Ricardo sighed, gesturing to the camp. Get your things together. People are waiting. Ghislaine's body tensed at this sudden declaration. Where are we going? Ghislaine asked sharply, his instincts on high alert. Ricardo didn't falter as he replied, The Perdium estate, of course. Ghislaine's blood ran cold. What? His eyes widened, glowing faintly in disbelief. That name, the estate, this wasn't just a second chance. Ghislaine grabbed Ricardo by the collar, his voice sharp. Say that again! His sudden anger left Ricardo fumbling for words. Perdium, Ricardo stammered. Ghislaine's eyes widened, a mix of disbelief and determination as he asked, You mean the fallen Perdium estate? Ghislaine stood on a hill, the wind carrying his thoughts. Below lay the estate, untouched, alive, exactly how he remembered it. It really is the Perdium estate, he muttered, overwhelmed. Why did it stand now, pristine and whole, when he knew it had fallen? Ricardo frowned. Did you hit your head or something? Calling your own estate a fallen one will get you kicked out. Ghislaine rubbed his temples. Am I dreaming right now? The sky and Ricardo's puzzled look told him otherwise. Ricardo sighed, his patience thinning. Stop daydreaming and move. He pulled Ghislaine forward, their steps echoing in the calm air. Ghislaine froze, glimpsing his reflection in fragmented visions. A younger face, the estate in its original state. Realization started to set in. The shattered images swirled together, showing timelines past and present. The ticking clock etched the truth into his heart. I traveled back to the past, Ghislaine whispered. The truth hit him like thunder. A second chance was laid before him. Memories flooded Ghislaine's mind. My younger self, fleeing the household, burdened by guilt. He saw his reflection in those distant, painful days. He remembered the accusations and betrayal that had pushed him away. Those moments became chains he couldn't break, even after he ran. Years later, he forged his name as a mercenary, drowning in blood and battlefields to bury the shame of his past. I returned to make up for my mistakes, he thought bitterly. But when he finally came back, the estate had turned to dust. Ghislaine stared at the fallen flag of Perdium. Not this time, he promised himself. The past had changed, and so would its outcome. Ghislaine stood silently, staring at the tattered flag fluttering in the wind. I lost everything, he thought, his heart heavy. But as the wind blew stronger, he gazed at the estate, whole and untouched. But it's still all here, he whispered. Looking up, he realized, all the people I hold dear are still here. His chest tightened with emotions he couldn't explain. I can't believe it, he thought, joy flickering through him. For a moment, he wanted to sing at the miracle before him. His smile faded as reality sank in. But it's too early to rejoice, Ghislaine reminded himself, his resolve hardening once again. We said we were here to raid orcs, right? Ghislaine asked, piecing together fragments of his past and present. Ricardo nodded. Yeah, I can't forget that day. Ghislaine's expression tensed, a shadow of regret crossing his face. This day, he muttered darkly, is the day most of us froze in fear and died. Memories surged back, vivid and unforgiving. In his past life, Ghislaine had underestimated the mission. Reports claimed 3 orcs, but when they arrived, they found an army instead. Almost all of them died because of his arrogance. The problem, Ghislaine thought bitterly, is proving I'm not the same useless fool. A sudden rumble caught Ghislaine's attention. He spun around as debris fell, heart racing. Something wasn't right. It was too soon. The ground trembled and a soldier screamed in panic. It's the orcs! The shout carried through the camp, igniting chaos everywhere. Ghislaine's eyes widened as the orcs burst through, their roars echoing like thunder. The orcs are here! Soldiers cried in horror. The brutal horde advanced faster than Ghislaine remembered. He clenched his fists, muttering, Already? Did they come this fast in my past life too? As the battlefield erupted into violence, Ghislaine steadied himself. This time will be different, he thought. I won't let them fall again. Chaos erupted as the orcs crashed through the battlefield. Swords clanged and screams echoed while blood painted the dirt in crimson. A soldier roared, desperation in his voice. Get into formation! His command barely cut through the overwhelming noise of the raging orcs. In the chaos, Sir Sylvan charged forward, shouting orders. Do not panic! Get into defensive formation! His presence rallied the remaining troops. An orc broke through the defensive line, slicing down soldiers with terrifying strength. Sylvan gritted his teeth, cutting the beast down with precision. Damn it! Sylvan cursed under his breath. Our line won't hold like this. How did this happen so quickly? Sweat beaded his brow. Commander! A soldier yelled, pointing behind Sylvan with sheer panic. Sylvan's heart froze at the urgency in his subordinate's voice. He turned, eyes narrowing. What? The warning came too late. The shadow of a massive orc loomed large behind him. The orc swung its massive axe, the air splitting with force. Sylvan barely managed to dodge, dirt exploding from the impact. Sylvan staggered to regain his footing. The orc charged again, relentless. His soldiers' screams echoed as they fell, one after another. A sudden force yanked Sylvan back, saving him from the deadly strike. He looked up to see a familiar figure, a lifeline in chaos. Sylvan blinked in confusion. Young master? He whispered, stunned as Ghislaine leapt through the battlefield with startling speed and precision. Ghislaine's blade swung wide, slicing through the orc's thick hide. Blood splattered, and the beast crumbled to the ground with a roar. Sylvan's shock deepened. Impossible, he muttered. The young master he knew was reckless, untrained, but this warrior was something entirely different. Ghislaine stood tall, blade dripping with blood, his expression calm yet unrelenting. He looked at Sylvan, determination burning in his eyes. Sylvan's voice caught as he stared. What just happened? Around them, soldiers froze, disbelief painted on their faces at what they had witnessed. Blood sprayed across the battlefield as Ghislaine struck the orc down. Its massive body crumbled, the chaos swallowing its agonized cries. Ghislaine braced himself as another orc lunged, its massive foot crashing into the ground, sending shockwaves and dirt flying everywhere. He exhaled sharply, frustrated. I can't use mana right now, he thought. Timing had cheated him. He needed more strength earlier. His sharp movements startled nearby soldiers. Young master? One soldier whispered in disbelief, watching Ghislaine's fluid strikes cut through the advancing orcs. Ghislaine extended his hand toward the commander. Give it, he said calmly, his eyes resolute. The tide of this battle would soon change. The commander stared at Ghislaine's outstretched hand, confused and skeptical. His pride resisted, but the weight of the moment lingered heavily. Ghislaine's calm demeanor betrayed his fierce resolve. He stepped forward, his hand unwavering. The commander's rights, he repeated, voice unshakable. Leon stands his ground, his voice unwavering. Give me the right to command. Desperation mixed with determination fills the air. The knight glared at Leon, sweat trickling down. The responsibility isn't yours. You're too young to gamble with lives. Leon clenched his fists, eyes locked on the knight. I can't, he muttered, his mind racing to find another way. The knight snapped back. This isn't a game. The Lord trusted me, not you. Frustration boiled as he stood firm. Leon sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. This is annoying, he whispered, still determined to prove himself worthy. A massive beast roared in the distance, shaking the ground. Leon and the knight instinctively turned, blades drawn, ready to fight. Fall back, the knight shouted, stepping in front of Leon. You're inexperienced, kid. Let me handle this monster alone. Leon scoffed under his breath. I guess I have no choice. With a burst of speed, he surged toward the beast. The knight's eyes widened in shock as Leon dashed past him, his blade gleaming. "What the—" "Stop!" he cried, powerless to interfere. Leon's blade struck like lightning, forcing the beast to stagger back. "What do you think you're doing?" the knight roared angrily. The knight's expression froze, disbelief clouding his face. "What?" Leon's movements were faster and sharper than anyone his age should possess. Leon spun through the air, his sword sinking into the monster's shoulder. The beast howled, its massive body shaking from impact. The monster clawed desperately at the sword, trying to yank it out. Leon landed gracefully, calm despite the chaos unfolding above. A flash of steel and the knight's eyes widened again. "How?" Leon's precision and strength weren't those of an ordinary young master. The beast crashed to the ground lifeless, Leon's blade buried deep. The knight and Leon stood victorious, silence sweeping across the battlefield. The knight's voice trembled as his eyes widened. "What?" He couldn't understand how Leon managed to strike such a weak spot. Leon looked back calmly, his gaze steady. "Skoven, right? Do you know what the most important thing in battle is?" The knight froze, unsure how to respond. His silence reflected his confusion as Leon's words began to linger in his mind. Elsewhere, soldiers struggled as monstrous orcs advanced relentlessly. Their terrified eyes darted around, unable to find any shred of hope or courage. Leon's voice echoed in the knight's ears. "There's no hope in winning a battle when our troops are filled with fear." Leon's expression turned serious, determination flaring in his eyes. "We need to gain momentum," he said, charging toward the battlefield. His sword flashed as he leapt into action, striking down one orc instantly. His movements were precise, swift, and confident. Blood splattered across the ground as Leon's blade sliced through the air. More orcs fell, their roars drowned by the chaos. The remaining orcs began to hesitate, glancing at each other. Leon's relentless attack created confusion, breaking their aggressive charge. Above the battlefield, rain fell steadily as Leon stood firm, his sword raised. Behind him, the soldiers began regaining their resolve. Skoven's lips curled into a grin as his confidence returned. "Ha! Come at me, orcs!" he yelled, gripping his blade tightly. Leon surged forward, his eyes blazing. "I'll kill all of you!" he shouted as he tore through the horde of monstrous enemies. The orcs roared back, but their overwhelming numbers didn't faze Leon. His movements flowed effortlessly, cutting down enemies with every swing. Skoven fought alongside him, his earlier doubts erased. Together they carved a path through the chaos, striking fear into the orcs. The battlefield echoed with cries and clashing steel. Orcs began retreating as Leon's fury turned the tide, forcing them into a desperate retreat. Skovan's voice trembled in disbelief. "Am I dreaming?" His eyes darted as Leon cut down orcs effortlessly, like it was nothing. Blood splattered, and Skoven watched Leon weave through enemies. "Even as a main force, it's hard for me to do anything." Skoven's thoughts swirled. So how is this scrawny young master doing all of this? He felt his pride crack under the truth. Leon's form slowed slightly, and Skoven's sharp eyes noticed. "I can already tell that he's tired," he thought, jaw tightening. However, Leon's relentless focus didn't waver. He used precise movements to dodge attacks and struck their weak spots with deadly accuracy. Leon moved like a ghost, slicing through the battlefield. Like a mindless sword killer, Skoven thought, or perhaps even something greater. Leon's voice boomed as he blocked another strike. "Is this all you got?" His smirk reflected both confidence and exhaustion. "I'm still not warmed up!" Leon shouted, surging forward again, blood sprayed as his blade tore through the crowd of orcs. Skoven blinked in awe. The young master's reckless charge had redirected every orc's attention, drawing them like moths to a flame. Soldiers yelled in panic, their voices echoing. "All of them are chasing the young master. Is he running away?" "Commander!" a soldier called desperately, watching Leon sprint toward the orcs. Panic set in as the chaos on the battlefield escalated. Skoven stared in disbelief, gritting his teeth. "What the hell are you thinking?" he muttered, watching Leon's seemingly suicidal actions unfold. Leon led the massive horde of orcs far from the soldiers. Running into their group and drawing attention was good, Skoven realized. But something clicked. "Running away now?" Skoven's gaze followed Leon's direction, narrowing on what lay ahead. Realization dawned like a thunderclap. And in that direction is the edge of a cliff. Skoven's voice cracked as his stomach dropped. "Wait, a cliff?" Skoven's breath hitched as his eyes widened. "Don't tell me—" His realization grew sharper as he watched Leon charging toward the cliff. "Troops, raise a shield wall!" Skoven shouted, rallying the soldiers. A spark of understanding flashed as Leon's plan began to unfold. From above, the shield wall formed. The orcs, relentless and chaotic, pushed forward, unaware of what awaited them ahead. "We'll follow the first sun," Scoven muttered, his trust solidifying as he watched Leon move with impossible confidence despite overwhelming odds. The ground shook as the orcs barreled forward. Leon's sword cut through their ranks, baiting them closer to the cliff's edge. Leon's mind raced, his movements fluid but deliberate. "Although I'd love to slice them all myself, my stamina won't hold out." He gritted his teeth, blood splattering as he moved. Even then, his focus didn't waver. "This should be enough for Scoven." The orcs roared as Leon led them further into chaos. Confusion rippled through their ranks as they realized something was wrong. Scoven and his troops prepared, shields raised in unison. The ground trembled as the tide of orcs funneled toward their position. Leon's timing was perfect, his speed unmatched. His sword flashed one last time as the orcs turned in confusion. "Now!" Leon stood at the cliff's edge, his chest rising and falling. Blood dripped from his sword, his eyes blazing with purpose. Scoven's voice thundered across the battlefield. "Troops!" His words rang like a war drum, echoing above the deafening cries of the orcs. "Push them off the cliff!" Scoven commanded, his soldiers advancing in a synchronized motion. The orcs screeched as they realized their trap. The soldiers pushed forward, shields locking. The overwhelming force left the orcs no room to escape as the edge loomed closer. Chaos erupted as the orcs tumbled over the cliff, their cries swallowed by the abyss. Leon watched silently, his mission accomplished. The orcs pushed forward like an unstoppable wave, their sheer numbers overwhelming as they tumbled toward the cliff's edge in chaos. A soldier screamed, as he watched the orcs fall. Their roars echoed, growing faint as they disappeared into the abyss. From the edge of the cliff, the soldiers watched in awe. Orcs fell one after another, like stones in a landslide. The crashing sound of bodies hitting the rocks below reverberated. Leon remained silent, his gaze locked on the battlefield, bloodied but unwavering. Scoven exhaled shakily, finally breaking the silence. "We did it!" Relief settled into his voice as his troops began to cheer. "Young master!" Scoven's voice rang out as Leon stumbled. The battle may have been won, but exhaustion visibly weighed on him now. Leon's body swayed before collapsing toward the cliff's edge, blood dripping from his blade. His grip on consciousness was slipping. The knight's eyes widened in terror as he ran forward. "Leon!" he shouted, watching the young master's figure fall dangerously close. Leon clenched his teeth, gripping his sword. His bloodied hands trembled as he hung there, his gaze sharp despite the pain. Scoven froze for a moment, his face stricken with fear. His voice caught in his throat as he watched helplessly. "Here, grab my hand!" Scovan yelled, leaning dangerously over the cliff. Soldiers rushed to help, panic spreading through the group. Leon looked up, his face pale. His hand twitched but remained unmoving. "I can't," he muttered weakly, his strength nearly gone. Scoven gritted his teeth, shouting again, "Hold on!" His voice cracked with desperation as Leon's grip on the edge began to slip. Leon's body swayed precariously. Scovan lunged forward, arms outstretched. Soldiers gasped, their faces frozen as time seemed to slow to a crawl. "Young master!" Scovan's final shout echoed across the cliffside, panic and dread heavy in his voice as Leon's fate hung in the balance. Leon's vision blurred as a soft voice called to him. "Ghislaine Appa!" The familiar tone echoed, pulling at his heartstrings. Silence fell as he stood frozen, his expression tense. "Elena?" he whispered, his breath catching as he processed the name. Shattered memories floated before him, fragments of his past. "Is Mom gone now?" Elena's voice sounded distant, filled with innocence and pain. More shards appeared, showing Elena smiling. "Thanks, Appa." And then with sorrow, "What's wrong with you nowadays?" The words cut deep. Ghislaine's heart ached as these fragmented moments surrounded him. Each memory was like a dagger, twisting old wounds he'd tried to forget. Another shard formed, Elena's tearful voice haunting him. "You're the worst." Ghislaine's chest tightened as he watched the fragments drifting above him. Standing alone in the dark expanse, Ghislaine whispered, "These are my memories of Elena?" His voice trembled as realization set in. A sudden shout pierced through the void. "Appa!" Ghislaine's head snapped up as a vision of Elena appeared, running toward him. "Let's go together!" she cried, her face filled with desperate determination. Ghislaine's hand instinctively reached out, his eyes wide in disbelief. A flood of emotion struck him as Elena's figure grew closer. His mind swirled, struggling to distinguish between illusion and reality. Ghislaine's eyes flew open, sweat beading on his forehead. He lay in a dim room, breath shaky, his heart pounding. Silence filled the space as he looked around. "I'm alive," he muttered, relief mixed with confusion. "Looks like they managed to save me." Ghislaine stared at the ceiling, a hand covering his face. Was that a dream, he wondered? the memory of Elena still vivid. The thought lingered, but before he could collect himself, pain shot through his chest. "Ugh!" he gasped, bolting upright in shock. His wide eyes scanned the room, heart racing. Whatever he had seen, dream or not, had shaken him to his very core. Ghislaine winced as he sat up. "My entire body hurts," he muttered. "It must be the consequence of pushing my limits." Despite the pain, he sighed with relief. "Well, I guess it makes it easier to know that I'm still alive." Suddenly he heard footsteps. A familiar figure entered the room. "Master?" The voice startled him, soft yet filled with concern. Ghislaine looked up, his eyes widening slightly. "Belinda?" he whispered, recognition dawning as the maid rushed closer with a worried expression. "You're awake!" Belinda exclaimed, relief flooding her features. She crossed the room hurriedly, her presence breaking the tension surrounding Ghislaine's recovery. "Do you know how worried I was?" Belinda scolded, her brows furrowed. "You should have let the soldiers handle the orcs." Before she could continue, Ghislaine moved suddenly, wrapping his arms around her. What are you doing? Did I do something wrong?" Ghislaine's voice was soft but steady. "No, I'm just glad to see you." His words carried a weight she didn't expect. Narrating internally, Ghislaine thought, "My personal tutor, Belinda. Since I was little, she was the only one who stayed by my side." The memories hurt as they surfaced. "After the family fell, I never thought I'd see her again, and yet, here she is." Ghislaine's resolve solidified. "I need to tell Belinda the truth," he thought, holding her gently. Her confused expression softened as he spoke. "Listen to me carefully," Ghislaine began, his eyes serious. "A catastrophe will soon strike Perdium." His words hung heavy in the air. "Huh? What are you saying?" Belinda pulled back, her face filled with disbelief. She searched his face for answers. "The truth is—" Ghislaine's voice didn't waver. "I died and came back to life." His piercing gaze locked onto hers, the weight of his words sinking in. Sure, Belinda stammered awkwardly, trying to process it. "I'm sure the shock killed you. Are you aware that you, not Perdium, are in greater danger?" Ghislaine watched Belinda's frustration grow, her tone sharp. She clearly didn't believe his words and dismissed him like an overgrown child. He sighed, realizing convincing her was futile. "She doesn't believe me," he thought, clenching his fists. "I guess this won't work." Belinda crossed her arms, exasperated. "Seriously, what were you thinking? Did you want to hurt yourself before the festival even started?" Ghislaine's gaze darkened, the word festival striking something within him. The distant memory pulled at his thoughts, making his expression shift. "Have you forgotten already?" Belinda asked, softening. "Lady Elena has been waiting for this day. She wants to go with you." Ghislaine's eyes lingered on an old photo frame nearby. "Right," he murmured to himself. "There was always a festival this time." His hand hovered above the frame as memories rushed back. A bittersweet realization dawned, tying his past life to this very moment. Standing alone by the window, Ghislaine recalled darker times. "In my past life, I never had time for something like this." He turned back toward Belinda, curiosity sparking. "How long until the festival?" he asked, though part of him dreaded her answer. Belinda thought for a moment. "It's next week. You've got about a week left." Ghislaine whispered, "Week, the day that changed everything." Ghislaine stood in silence, his expression heavy. The memory lingered, an unshakable weight that pulled at his thoughts and resolve. Elena's tear-filled eyes stared up at him, desperate and pleading. Her small hands gripped tightly, her voice trembling with emotion. "1 week later, Elena will die." The words echoed in his mind, her fragile figure forever etched into his haunting memories. Ghislaine charges toward Belinda and pulls her into a sudden, tight hug. His expression is serious, but his actions are unexpected. Belinda's eyes widen in shock, completely caught off guard. She freezes, stunned by his unusual behavior and the silence in the air. Belinda pushes against him, flustered and confused. Her face turns red as she demands answers, unable to process what's happening. Ghislaine holds her close, his voice barely audible but filled with emotion. He murmurs softly that he missed her terribly all this time. Belinda finally breaks free and stumbles backward, clearly unnerved. She shouts at him, calling him creepy while trying to keep her composure. Ghislaine clutches his chest, surprised at Belinda's strength. He mutters to himself, amazed at how strong she has become over the years. Belinda crosses her arms and glares at him from across the room. She's frustrated, asking if he thinks everything is now okay. Ghislaine flinches as her words hit him like a slap. He remembers harsh things he once said, clearly embarrassed by his past behavior. Belinda raises her voice, calling him disgusting for forgetting the cruel words he hurled before. Ghislaine looks down, stunned by his guilt. He admits to himself that in their past, he was far from perfect. Quietly, Ghislaine apologizes, his face flushed with shame and regret. Belinda, still glaring, tells another girl nearby what happened. She loudly exclaims that Ghislaine apologized first, a rare and awkward moment. Ghislaine scratches his head awkwardly, avoiding their judgmental stares. He mutters that he definitely won the fight, though no one seems convinced. Belinda presses further, teasing him with suspicion. She raises her voice, insisting that something doesn't add up about his so-called victory. Ghislaine snaps, shouting in frustration. His energy sparks as he demands to know why everyone keeps implying he was knocked out. The girls burst into laughter, clearly amused by his denial. Ghislaine slumps to the floor, defeated by their teasing but quietly smiling too. Ghislaine stares into the distance, his expression conflicted. He thinks deeply, realizing everyone around him feels just as he remembered. His thoughts turn heavy as he reflects on his past self. He regrets wasting so much time on meaningless actions back then. He remembers rejecting Elena's kind offer to join her for the festival. Instead, he used flimsy excuses to avoid her. Ghislaine's memories darken. He recalls the last time he saw Elena alive, her bright face disappearing forever from his world. Despair clouds his face as he clutches his chest, guilt overwhelming him. He wishes he had been there to save her. Belinda and Ghislaine stand together with a tense atmosphere lingering. Belinda turns to him, asking if they can finally head inside. Two bodyguards, Janal and Philip, enter the room with their usual seriousness. They address Elena politely, asking for her attention. The bodyguards explain their reason for entering, mentioning servants needing approval regarding festival supplies. Their presence seems out of place. Ghislaine raises a brow, questioning why Elena's handling tasks that others typically take care of. He finds it odd and unnecessary. Belinda smirks, clearly unimpressed. She points out how oblivious he has been, implying he's clueless about everyone's struggles and responsibilities. Ghislaine watches the bodyguards leave, mulling over the strange shortage of workers. He feels out of place in this familiar yet different world. He admits to himself he never cared about these matters before. The festival's importance now feels like something he missed entirely. Stepping forward with determination, Ghislaine announces that he wants to help too. His words shock everyone present, leaving them speechless. Elena stares at him in surprise, her wide eyes reflecting disbelief. Belinda's face follows suit, thinking something must be seriously wrong with him. The scene transitions to the bustling festival market. Stalls line the streets, people chatter happily, and the air feels lively and festive. Ghislaine steps into the busy festival grounds, shouting his intention to help. People nearby scatter, unnerved by his overwhelming presence. Workers beg him to leave, worried his intimidating aura will scare others away. Despite his good intentions, Ghislaine causes more chaos. Frustrated, Ghislaine gets dragged away by someone. They suggest he stay out of the way to avoid causing more trouble than help. His thoughts darken as he recalls Elena's tragic fate, imagining her lifeless body being discovered near the festival grounds in the past. Determined, he decides he needs to understand the castle's secrets. He resolves to prevent another tragedy from ever happening again. Ghislaine freezes when he sees a familiar face approaching him. His eyes widen as recognition hits. He can't believe who it is. "Old man Fergus?" he mutters in disbelief. Fergus looks relieved, overjoyed to see Ghislaine safe, though Ghislaine seems overwhelmed by emotions. Fergus explains he rushed to find Ghislaine after hearing troubling news about the festival. His voice is filled with concern and urgency. As Fergus grips his shoulder, Ghislaine tries to shake off the weight of the situation. He looks distracted, lost in thought. Ghislaine sighs deeply, knowing he has no choice but to return to his room. He promises himself he'll uncover the truth soon. Ghislaine stops Fergus with a sudden question. He asks about the abandoned training field within the castle grounds, his voice firm and determined. Fergus looks confused but humors Ghislaine. "Why the training grounds?" he asks, wondering why Ghislaine would suddenly want to go there. Ghislaine clenches his fists and stares straight ahead. "To train," he says with unwavering conviction, leaving no room for further questions. Fergus stares at Ghislaine in shock before silently nodding. Understanding Ghislaine's resolve, he agrees to show him the way to the field. They arrive at the training grounds. Ghislaine stands still, taking in the sight before him. His mind races with thoughts of preparation. Ghislaine steps into the training hall, eyes widening in surprise. The place is in far better condition than he had imagined. Fergus, calm as ever, explains they kept it in top shape in case Ghislaine ever wished to use the facilities. Fergus stands confidently, assuring Ghislaine that whatever he's experiencing must be temporary. His words carry a mix of care and confidence. Ghislaine's face darkens, memories flooding his mind. He wonders if Fergus did something similar in his previous life, connecting dots in his thoughts. His eyes sharpen as he reflects. He begins piecing together the past, questioning what role Fergus may have played in earlier events. Ghislaine looks down with a somber expression, connecting the truth of his resurrection to his need to live a better life. Fergus listens as Ghislaine casually admits he's already died once and experienced what it's like. His tone is serious but calm. Fergus looks confused yet sharp, acknowledging Ghislaine's strange words. Ghislaine boldly confirms that he did die and was brought back to life. With a dismissive wave, Ghislaine tells Fergus to leave him alone. He's ready to start training and doesn't need further interruptions. Fergus steps back, agreeing reluctantly. As he walks away, Ghislaine reflects on his previous life, remembering how he treated everyone as enemies. Ghislaine stares into the distance, realizing how short-sighted he had been before. His mind flashes to those who cared about him the most. He mutters to himself, counting down the time. A week. It's all he has to make things right before tragedy strikes again. His memory shifts back to the cause of Elena's death. The one responsible was revealed to be a lord from a neighboring territory. He clenches his fists as war flashes before his eyes. Elena's death set off a chain of events that ruined everything for them. Ghislaine's eyes harden as he recalls the downfall of their house. Elena's death marked the first domino that destroyed everything he held dear. Ghislaine's determination blazes in his eyes as he declares to himself that he must set everything straight from this point onward. Sitting cross-legged in the training hall, Ghislaine reflects on the need to rebuild his strength. Time is short, but he has a plan. He focuses on controlling mana, knowing it is essential for his growth. Mana is a supernatural energy that pushes humans beyond limits. Memories of the battlefield flood back, moments where chaos reigned. Despite the danger, Ghislaine had always been able to harness mana instinctively. His resolve hardens, even though time is against him. He believes that regaining control of mana will be his first major breakthrough. Ghislaine concentrates deeply, visualizing mana particles floating around him. He begins connecting them, pulling the invisible strands together like weaving a thread. Bundling the mana feels natural, as though spinning a spool. He marvels at how familiar the process still feels in his hands. A surge of energy pulses as Ghislaine creates his mana core. For him, the process is second nature, like walking through a familiar path. He clenches his fists, determination unshaken. Using methods he once learned and combining his natural affinity, Ghislaine pushes the limits of his training. Power surges through him as his mana core stabilizes. The raw energy crackles around his body, illuminating the hall in a dazzling spectacle. Ghislaine pushes further, his energy exploding as he builds multiple mana cores. He weaves them together, creating a force far stronger than before. His body shakes violently as the intense energy overwhelms him. It's an excruciating process, yet Ghislaine refuses to stop, his will unyielding. Blood trickles down his face as he reaches his limit. He gasps for air, acknowledging that he can only maintain 3 cores for now. Kneeling on the ground, Ghislaine grimaces. He remembers how, in his past life, running out of mana led to disastrous defeats on the battlefield. He reflects on his past failures, moments where his strength faltered, costing him victories. This time, he swears not to let mana depletion defeat him. Ghislaine clenches his chest, reassuring himself that he's in control for now. He steels his resolve for the coming days. Determined, he reflects on the short time he has left. He knows that every moment counts to achieve the strength he needs. Ghislaine's mind turns dark. He recalls the powerful figures responsible for his house's destruction, shadowed silhouettes of past enemies. His eyes glow with unrelenting fury. He vows to hunt down and destroy those who orchestrated his family's downfall, no matter what it takes. A serene scene follows, a castle under a starlit sky. The day of the festival finally arrives, marking the beginning of his next move. Ghislaine carefully adjusts his weapon, sliding it into place. His preparations are complete as he readies himself for the festival. He walks through the bustling streets, the festival lights shining around him. His calm yet intense demeanor draws attention. Elena notices him from afar, her eyes widening in surprise. She hadn't expected him to show up at such an event. She approaches him with curiosity, asking why he's here. Ghislaine, standing tall, responds casually, saying he should show up as a Perdium. Elena smiles faintly, pleased by his presence. The two walk together through the lively festival, surrounded by glowing lights and chatter. Elena looks at Ghislaine suspiciously, teasing him about his odd behavior. She mentions hearing he's been training non-stop for the past week. Ghislaine shrugs off her concerns, claiming there's nothing wrong with a knight in training honing his skills, even if it seems unusual to her. Elena glares playfully, reminding him how he used to complain about responsibilities. She teases him for acting like their father's successor. Ghislaine winces as Elena playfully flicks his forehead. She laughs, enjoying the moment, and says she likes how things feel now between them. Smiling softly, Elena looks at Ghislaine. She says it feels like the old him is back, a version of him she missed dearly. Ghislaine stands quietly under the starlit sky, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. The past week has given him clarity. He reflects on how his recent actions have slowly started shifting things around him. The ripple effect of change is undeniable now. Ghislaine recalls small moments with those around him, noticing how their attitudes have begun to soften. The future feels less certain, yet hopeful. In his mind, he visualizes events like a chessboard. Some outcomes remain unchanged, but he knows small moves can alter the game. Gripping a chess piece tightly, Ghislaine resolves to react carefully. He understands now that each decision he makes can reshape their future. Ghislaine tightens his grip on his satchel, satisfied with his preparations. He feels ready for whatever challenges lie ahead of him. Walking through the vibrant festival, Ghislaine observes Belinda and Elena enjoying themselves, their laughter breaking through the tension in his mind. The festive stalls glow brightly under the night sky. Ghislaine allows himself a rare smile, appreciating the peaceful moment, even if brief. The castle looms in the distance, bathed in moonlight. Ghislaine's thoughts shift again, the weight of what's to come pressing on him. Sitting beside Belinda on the steps, he listens to her sigh. She complains about the festival's sameness, wondering if something exciting will happen. Ghislaine watches the festival unfold with an uneasy expression. He feels like something is off, wondering if it's because Elena is here. Trying to distract himself, Ghislaine turns to Elena and suggests checking out other areas of the festival to pass the time. Elena grins, grabbing his arm excitedly. She mentions hearing about a new blacksmith's display and insists they go see it. Dragged along by Elena's energy, Ghislaine allows a small smile. He mutters that this better be worth it, though his mind remains unsettled. As they walk, Ghislaine's gaze sharpens. Something catches his attention in the distance, his instincts flaring up. It feels far too familiar. His expression darkens as he spots familiar faces in the crowd, enemies from the past. The traitors of our house, he whispers to himself. Elena and her group finally arrive at the darkened, empty square. Tension grows as she scans for any sign of life. They stand in the middle of the silent street. The emptiness feels heavy, as though someone is watching from the shadows. Elena frowns and murmurs, confused. "What is this? There's nothing here." Everyone glances at one another, uneasy about the situation. A knight reassures her, "Maybe we're early. People will show up soon." Elena huffs, crossing her arms with clear frustration. Ghislaine, her sharp-eyed companion, narrows his gaze. His instincts scream danger as he mutters, "This place feels too perfect. It's suspicious." The eerie street seems normal, but something feels off. Ghislaine analyzes every detail, the open escape routes and the barricades nearby. He scans further. This isn't just an empty street. Every angle looks deliberate, like someone prepared for a confrontation ahead of time. Ghislaine finally moves. "Let's go," he shouts, grabbing Elena's arm. "There's no time to waste standing in an obvious trap like this." Elena resists, pulling back in irritation. "Why? We're already here. At least let me look around before leaving so quickly." Ghislaine shakes his head, frustrated. "Why are you so strong?" Elena grins slyly, shrugging. "You'd be surprised what I can handle." One of the knights steps forward, reaching toward Elena. "Young lady," his voice trembles, but something strange stops him mid-sentence. Elena flinches back as the knight's expression twists awkwardly. He staggers, almost choking on his words. Something feels incredibly wrong now. Wide-eyed, Elena stares at the knight. "Philip?" she whispers. His face pales, and she realizes something unnatural is happening to him. The knight's shadow elongates unnaturally, twisting behind him. Elena gasps, stumbling backward. "What's wrong with you guys?" she shouts in panic. The knight finally straightens and smirks eerily. "Oh my," he says softly, his voice dripping with menace. "Did I scare you?" The knight smiles menacingly, his red eyes glowing faintly. "It's just that a reasonable request came in," he says darkly. Elena stares at him, stunned and terrified. A request," she stammers, her face pale with realization and confusion. Heavy footsteps echo behind them, pulling attention. The sound grows louder, signaling the arrival of someone or something ominous and dangerous. A group of masked figures approaches in the distance. Their steady march is unnerving, as if they are coming for something specific. At the front, a man with a wide hat and dark glasses speaks coldly. "Your work here is clean, Frank." "Of course," the knight replies, stepping back. "We've brought the young lady as promised. So let's end the deal here." The man in the hat narrows his eyes and tilts his head. "Isn't that the eldest son of the Perdium?" Ghislaine clenches his fists as Elena cowers behind him. The man chuckles. "I don't think I asked for him." The knight shrugs, smirking cruelly. "I'll just hand him over for free. He followed us foolishly, not knowing his place." Ghislaine glares at the knight, his voice filled with controlled anger. Jamal, so you sold us out. You'll regret this. Jamal smirks, crossing his arms confidently. Why don't you start worrying about yourself first, little hero? He taunts with a sneer. He gestures outward toward the landscape. All we have to do is run away to a faraway place and disappear forever. Jamal continues mockingly. Who isn't sick of this war-torn land? Perdium's tormented enough. No one will even care if we leave. Ghislaine doesn't move. Jamal spreads his arms dramatically, daring him to react. There are plenty of others abandoning Perdium anyway, right? Before Jamal can finish his smug tirade, Ghislaine lunges forward with blazing speed, blade in hand. The knight's smirk freezes instantly. Elena recoils as Jamal and the man in the hat stare at Ghislaine, who steps forward, his presence silencing the scene. The man with dark glasses glances calmly at Jamal. His voice turns cold. Did you ever think they'd sell us out? Ghislaine stands tall, his blade dripping with fresh blood. The fallen knights lay behind him, and his eyes glow with focus. His calm voice cuts through the silence. They never sold us out, Jamal. You just didn't see it coming, did you? The knight howls furiously at his failure, his pride shattered. Jamal, that idiot! How could a knight lose to him? Ghislaine's blade pierces clean through the knight's chest. The force of the blow stuns everyone as the knight freezes in shock. Impossible, the knight stammers, blood spilling from his mouth. His disbelief lingers as the deadly blow finally takes its toll. Ghislaine removes his sword and the knight collapses lifelessly. Elena watches wide-eyed, stunned by the brutal efficiency of her brother's attack. The man in the hat frowns, observing Ghislaine. Are you sure this is Perdium's eldest son? He doesn't seem ordinary to me. With a slight smirk, he mutters to himself, judging by his technique, he's no amateur. This changes things significantly. Ghislaine charges again, his attacks imbued with mana, slicing through enemy knights with ease. The glow of his power lights up the night. Elena clutches Ghislaine's sleeve, her voice trembling. But big bro, what's happening right now? Her confusion is mixed with growing fear. Ghislaine pauses for a brief moment, his face unreadable. He glances down at Elena without saying a word, lost in thought. Elena's voice rises in desperation. Big bro, she shouts, only to see him turn toward her with an unexpected calm expression. Ghislaine kneels beside her and softly says, Take a little rest. His voice is steady as though everything is under control. The man in the hat smirks darkly, looking directly at Ghislaine. Thank you for doing the work for us, eldest son. Ghislaine stares silently, his sharp gaze unwavering. The man continues, You're much different than what I heard. Have you been hiding your skills? From above, the square is a battlefield scattered with fallen enemies. Ghislaine stands at the center, surrounded by the silent aftermath. The man in the hat adjusts his glasses, speaking calmly. What does that matter to you? What's your next move now? Ghislaine mutters under his breath as his focus sharpens. 3, huh? He glances ahead, blade ready, sizing up the remaining opponents. Blue energy flares up from the enemies. The man in the hat sneers, The two beside me are nothing like the others. We can deal with him here. Even if he is stronger, there's nowhere left for him to run, the man declares. Ghislaine, undeterred, grips his sword as mana crackles around him. I have to end this quickly, he thinks, his focus intensifying. He steps forward, his voice steady. Let me ask you one thing. Whose request was this? His words carry a heavy weight. The man chuckles dismissively. Is there a need for the dead man to know that? I knew you'd ask anyway. One of the masked figures asks, Should we sever his head? The man in the hat simply raises a hand. No, he smirks sinisterly. Capture him alive and sink every blade into his body. Make him go mad from the pain. He has to writhe in agony. Only then will the shape we need come out beautifully, he says with chilling calm. The masked men respond immediately. Yes, sir, as they ready their weapons, surrounding Ghislaine with menacing intent. Ghislaine's sharp eyes narrow. Without hesitation, he hurls his sword forward with deadly precision, preparing to face the incoming onslaught. A masked enemy charges at Ghislaine, his blade glowing with lethal intent. A firecracker! The assassin shouts, closing the distance quickly. Ghislaine doesn't flinch as the blade nears. He reacts in an instant, deflecting the strike and landing a deadly counterattack. The assassin's helmet shatters from the force, his eyes widen in horror as he feels Ghislaine's power overwhelm him completely. Ghislaine strikes a powerful blow, sending the assassin crashing backward in a burst of energy. The others watch in disbelief. A shallow trick, Ghislaine mutters, stepping forward. His composure is unwavering as more masked enemies surround him, ready to strike. Ghislaine senses another attack coming from behind. His eyes narrow, instincts flaring as he prepares to dodge the incoming strike. Without hesitation, he twists and blocks the attack mid-motion, parrying the enemy's blade with expert precision. Sparks fly on impact. He spins in one fluid motion, launching a devastating counterstrike that takes out the masked enemy before they can react. The final blow lands, and blood sprays across the ground. Ghislaine stands tall, his blade gleaming as his enemies fall one by one. Ghislaine's expression hardens as he catches his breath. His sharp gaze glimmers with resolve, ready for the next challenge. A surprise attack comes from above, a masked assassin leaping with deadly speed. Ghislaine blocks just in time, but the impact shakes him. He pivots smoothly, slashing upward. The assassin staggers backward, unable to comprehend how Ghislaine countered such a precise sneak attack. The man in the hat observes with narrowed eyes. He managed to react. From that position? That was a perfect sneak attack, too. Ghislaine doesn't stop moving. With lightning speed, he deflects and strikes, overwhelming the masked enemies that continue to charge at him. Blades clash, and Ghislaine's mana-infused strikes slice through his opponents. The square echoes with the sound of his relentless counterattacks. Ghislaine's sword slices through the air, narrowly missing the man in the hat, who dodges back with a sudden sharp movement. The hat flies off his head, spinning midair before hitting the ground with a soft thud. Everyone pauses, watching tensely. Ghislaine's sharp gaze locks onto the man as mana crackles around his blade. His instincts scream that this is far from over. The man lunges with incredible speed, forcing Ghislaine to parry. Their weapons clash violently, sending sparks and bursts of energy flying. With a smirk, the man steadies himself and mutters darkly, "Impressive. If I lacked mana, you would have taken my head." Ghislaine barely dodges the blade aimed at his neck, the sharp edge grazing his skin as sparks and mana burst outward. The man glares at him, stunned. Did he focus mana to reduce the damage? He wonders, gripping his sword tightly. A chilling grin spreads across the man's face as blue energy crackles violently around him. "You shall die here," he declares menacingly. The swordsman's smirk glinted through the chaos. His mana surged like lightning, barely keeping his head above the edge of defeat. With a swift upward slash, his blade howled, deflecting the deadly blow. Sparks erupted as their swords collided like thunder. That won't work on me, the swordsman thought. He steadied his grip, mana surging, eyes locked on his relentless opponent's strikes. The white-haired warrior dashed forward, his sword arced with electric force, aiming directly at the swordsman's chest. The air crackled ominously. Their blades met midair in a final blinding clash, tension rippling through the room. One mistake here would mean instant death. The swordsman's eyes widened. His opponent was smiling even as the fight turned desperate. What did that smirk mean? Something felt off. Reacting quickly, the swordsman dodged low as his enemy's blade slashed inches from his head. Stone tiles cracked under the pressure. Twisting mid-dodge, he countered with a sweeping strike. Sparks erupted again, but his opponent's monstrous strength blocked every desperate swing. The relentless flurry forced him back. His feet skidded along the ground, smoke curling from his blade as mana pushed him forward. "You still think you can win?" his opponent taunted, advancing calmly. The swordsman tightened his jaw. This fight was far from over. A red glint flashed. Blood trickled down the swordsman's lips as a sudden, brutal blow sent him staggering. Pain seared his chest. He coughed sharply, stunned. His enemy's strength was beyond reason, and the power behind the strikes was growing unnaturally fierce. The swordsman steadied himself, his breaths ragged. Something shifted. His blade now pulsed with newfound energy, a force not there moments before. "What's happening?" his opponent growled, eyes narrowing. The swordsman's strikes, once weak, now shattered his defenses, cutting deep with unexpected precision. As realization dawned, the swordsman muttered, "Elena." A grim truth surfaced. There was a larger force behind this battle, one he didn't see before. The air darkened as crimson energy engulfed his figure. The man emerged, his power radiating like flames licking an invisible storm. "Prepare yourself," he muttered, his voice steady. The third core activated, a surge of raw strength surging through his very being. His opponent staggered back, stunned. What is this power, he thought, watching the eerie, vibrant aura pulse like a heartbeat. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, his sword blazing. The white-haired warrior gripped his weapon tightly, pushing all his strength into one attack. Sparks exploded as their blades connected. A bone-rattling shockwave ripped through the street, scattering dust and leaving the ground trembling. The fight escalated with dizzying speed. The warrior's strikes grew faster, sharper, like an unstoppable storm determined to end everything. The swordsman parried desperately, mana flaring through his body. Every clash chipped at his resolve. His opponent was now something monstrous. Impossible, he thought. His strikes felt futile as the warrior moved effortlessly, weaving through the air like a predator circling its prey. The white-haired fighter's power kept building like an unrelenting tidal wave. A single swing of his sword shattered stone and steel alike. Gritting his teeth, the swordsman whispered, "This can't be happening." Despite his defenses, the raw power began cutting through his enchantments. A burst of crimson energy sent shockwaves across the battlefield. His opponent's speed surged, movements precise, radiating a deadly focus. The swordsman's vision blurred as a devastating strike connected. Blood splattered, and his body crumpled under the sheer inhuman force. "It's as if he's become a different person," the swordsman thought, trembling. Each swing tore through defenses like they were paper. One final blow shattered his blade. The swordsman fell, breath ragged, blood pooling as his opponent loomed like death itself. Kneeling weakly, he looked up. "Was this always your plan?" he muttered as the warrior's crimson aura consumed the night. The white-haired warrior surged forward, his crimson aura wrapping his figure, his expression sharpened, blade ready to carve the end. His opponent roared in defiance. Blood streamed from his mouth, his eyes bulging as the crushing blow landed, sending him reeling. He staggered, unable to comprehend the overwhelming power in that single strike. Fear finally replaced his usual mocking arrogance. The warrior stepped closer, his blade dripping with blood. "It's over," he thought, gripping his sword, prepared to finish everything. "Let's finish our confrontation," he muttered, voice steady but cold. The enemy collapsed further, his ragged breathing echoing in the empty street. "Who's the one who requested this?" the warrior demanded, his gaze fixed on the weakened man still struggling to rise. The swordsman groaned but refused to fall. "I'm not going down so easily," he thought, forcing his trembling body forward. Gripping his weapon, he lunged. His determination turned reckless, a final desperate effort to take the white-haired warrior down with him. "I'll end this now!" the swordsman shouted, his blade aimed to pierce through, glowing crimson with the last of his mana. The warrior moved swiftly, dodging the attack. "You're out of chances," he thought, watching as his opponent finally crumbled under exhaustion. The swordsman growled, sweat and blood pouring as his body strained against invisible threads. "How?" he thought, eyes darting to his opponent. "How about we make a deal?" the warrior offered calmly, his mana threads locking his enemy's every movement in place. "Answer my question," the warrior pressed, his eyes cold and determined. "I'll sheathe my sword if you cooperate." "These threads, I can't move," the swordsman thought, panic settling in as he struggled. He hadn't noticed the trap forming earlier. The warrior stepped back, readying himself. "I'm sure you'll figure out how to patch yourself up," he said, blade steady. The warrior's voice was cold and determined. "Your mana core won't matter if I destroy it," he declared, eyes burning red. The swordsman's eyes widened, realizing too late. A powerful force crushed him, shaking his very core, his mana scattering uncontrollably. "What's happening?" he screamed, clutching his chest. The crimson energy overwhelmed him as cracks rippled through his body like glass shattering. His mana burst outward in streams of blue, scattering into the void. The realization hit. His strength was unraveling before his eyes. "My mana! It's scattering," he gasped, fear consuming him. The warrior stepped forward, blade gleaming, ready to deal the final blow. "Are you scared now?" the warrior asked, his calm demeanor contrasting the panic in the swordsman's eyes as mana bled out. "Stop this madness," the swordsman howled, desperation clear. His last defenses crumbled, his body shaking violently under the sheer power's grip. The warrior's expression was unrelenting. "That's for the disgrace," he muttered, the sword pulsing with crimson energy, a judgment about to fall. "I'll manage it." The warrior's eyes flashed, the last words sealing his opponent's fate. The man knew. There was no bluffing this time. It was Count Desmond!" the swordsman shrieked, blood pouring from his lips. Fear finally broke him, revealing the truth he hid. The warrior froze momentarily. "He's the one who requested this?" he asked, glaring at the weakened man crumpled beneath his grip. "Yes, he said he needed a war," the swordsman stammered, his face twisted in agony. "It's Desmond, I swear!" The warrior's memories flickered, hidden alliances, shady families scheming behind the scenes. "Desmond," he muttered, his resolve hardening. A final piece clicked. "So that's why you killed Elena," the warrior accused. His expression darkened, and his grip tightened, fury igniting in his chest. With one swift strike, the blade fell. The swordsman's struggles ceased, and the streets fell silent under the weight of justice. Blood streamed as the swordsman gasped. "What are you doing?" he stammered, fear overtaking him. "This wasn't supposed to happen." The warrior's gaze hardened. "This is different from what you planned, isn't it?" he said, stepping closer, energy swirling menacingly. A cold smirk crept onto the warrior's face. "What's wrong? Killed so many, yet you tremble now that it's your turn." The swordsman chuckled weakly, his breath ragged. "Nothing will change, even if you kill me. The wheels are already in motion." Do you think anyone will listen to someone like you? He hissed. Perdium will perish. War has already begun. Let me tell you something, the warrior said, his expression unflinching. I died once, and I was reborn to fix this. The warrior's words struck like lightning. His body pulsed with energy, and his enemy realized he was staring at death incarnate. Crimson mana erupted violently as the swordsman screamed, the pressure unbearable. This wasn't just vengeance, it was retribution in its purest form. A blinding light rose into the sky, consuming everything. It lit the streets like dawn as the warrior stood unmoving. When the light faded, the warrior stood tall beneath the violet glow. The silence echoed, the battle's outcome clear to all. Blood stained the streets as the swordsman gasped his last breaths. His body trembled before finally collapsing, unmoving in defeat. The warrior stood over him, bloodied but victorious. His chest rose and fell as the weight of the moment finally settled. His gaze shifted to the fallen, a reminder of lives lost. Elena's face flashed in his mind, her death still unforgiven. He turned toward the quiet streets, sword loosening in his hand. This is just the beginning, he thought, his resolve unwavering. The sword fell to the ground with a sharp clang, a sign of victory, but also the start of something far greater. The warrior tilted his head back, breathing heavily. Ha! A small victory, but his body screamed, reminding him of his limits. Pain struck suddenly as blood dripped from his mouth. Ugh! His legs shook, but he gritted his teeth and stood tall. Damn it, he muttered. Pushing his body so far reminded him of his past life, the weight of being the mercenary king. He steadied himself, eyes sharp. I won't fall like this, he declared. Each breath was heavy, but his resolve only grew stronger. His steps echoed into the silent streets, a declaration of defiance. Whatever came next, he would endure and see it through. The wooden structure shattered as he landed, blood smearing across the debris. His sharp gaze swept the surroundings for lingering traces. In my past life, they found a body here, he thought, recalling bitter memories. The truth had been buried with silence. Son of Degard, a name etched in his mind. His thoughts connected. The body found was proof of an orchestrated scheme. He clenched his fist, pieces falling into place. They framed them, all to fuel the war, he muttered bitterly, gripping his sword. This time, I'll expose it. Determination filled his voice as he stepped forward, refusing to let history repeat itself once more. His thoughts hardened as the memory loomed. If this truth is revealed, war will ignite, he realized, the weight crushing him. Standing amidst the wreckage, he whispered, let's erase this evidence. Flames reflected in his eyes as his fingers tensed on the torch. Fire erupted, consuming everything. The buildings cracked and crumbled as the inferno spread, swallowing all traces of the incriminating secrets. He turned, the blazing flames reflecting his unwavering conviction. I won't let this happen again. I'll stop it this time. The warrior walked away, his figure silhouetted against the burning horizon. The war's shadow still loomed, but this time he was ready.